So again, my name is Robin Orr. I work for the Chittenden Solid Waste District as an outreach coordinator. My colleague Ethan here does the same thing. He focuses on businesses, and I'm going to turn it over to him. I'm going to be doing the main part of the presentation, and Ethan is going to be wrangling all of your thoughtful questions all evening. So he's going to tell you a little bit about how that'll work, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, we just would ask that you use the Q&A feature to engage. So I will be the person behind the chat on this end, and happy to answer questions, comments, what have you. Know that there is both the panel for the questions that you are asking, but also ones that are already answered. And I point that out both so you can save yourself by seeing the answer that somebody's already gotten, as well as questions that you might not have thought of. So that's that. And we will also, should we run out of time to cover everything, we'll be able to take your questions with us and get back to you on those. But we hope to cover everything tonight.
Yep, we should. And our plan is to just get through the slides and then have a good ample time for lots of discussion and questions. But if there's something compelling that you need clarified in the middle of the presentation, Ethan will kind of be the arbiter of when, because I won't be able to see them. So he'll decide, either call it out so we can address it right then, or else he'll be holding them off and until the end when we can address them for where everyone will be able to hear them. So I am gonna share my screen and we'll get started. Sorry, just a tiny little bit of technical finagling. All right, is everyone able to see that first slide? I'm going to rely on
good
to tell me if not. Okay, so we've already been through our welcome and introduced Ethan. So just a quick overview of where we're headed. I'm going to start with just a quick overview of who CSWD is and what we do. Then we'll get into the meat of what the law requires and a little bit of the reasoning behind that. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty details about how to make that work in your real life. And then we'll have time for all of your questions. So CSWD is a public entity. There were the state established solid waste districts, or they allowed the creation of solid waste districts all around the state so that each town is responsible for having a solid waste management plan. And a lot of towns banded together to form districts, and which is what happened in Chittenden County. So all the towns in Chittenden County are members. Every town has a volunteer who serves on our board. So, and also an alternate. So our Board of Commissioners has 18 members, and then they all have alternates who attend when they can't. They have the authority to pass ordinances, not without public input and all sorts of things. But I guess the main point is we are not the people who pick up trash or do any of that stuff like happens in a lot of other states. We're the people who try to help you make less trash and to help you responsibly manage the waste that we all know is impossible to avoid. So, we focus on reuse, recycling, all those things. But we know we're always going to need a place to put stuff. So we also operate a bunch of facilities to make it easier for everyone in the district to properly manage the waste that they can't avoid. So I'm going to start over in the top right. We have 7 drop-off centers around the county. And with one exception, they're full service operations. You can bring your household trash, you can bring your recycling, you can bring food scraps, you can bring all 3 or just 1 or any 2. There are fees for some things. There are not fees for many other things. And there's more information about when they're open and which things they accept on our website. They're do-it-yourself facilities. So you just pull up to the booth, And we'll show this in a little video later. Tell the folks what you have, and they'll point you in the right direction for you to unload the material yourself. And then we also operate a year-round environmental depot, which is what most people would call in their mind a household hazardous waste facility. So this is where we take paint, cleaners, any kind of chemicals that are dangerous that either can't or shouldn't be put into the landfill that need to be managed differently. We collect those at the environmental depot, which is a bricks and mortar facility that's open all year round. A lot of other districts don't have that. They have like 1 or 2 days a month that they're open. So we're very resource rich here, so that's a great service anytime, all year round during their opening hours. Chittenden County residents can bring dangerous things from their homes at no charge, and we will make sure it gets properly managed. The materials recovery facility, which we call the MRF, is where all of the blue bin recyclables go, whether you bring them to us yourself at a drop-off center, or if you live in Burlington, the city of Burlington picks them up, or in other towns, it's whoever you want to hire to pick them up. They all come to our MRF where we sort them and bale them and then send the materials out for market. And then finally, we run Green Mountain Compost, which is a commercial composting operation that is a great service for folks who either can't or don't want to compost at their homes. And it's also we're able to process different kinds of materials more materials, I guess, than can go into a standard backyard bin. So even people who are composting at home might want to bring some things like meat and bones that they wouldn't put into their home compost. You can still bring just those to us. So now we will get into the main meat, as it were. So what does the law require? It's really simple. Food scraps can't go into the trash. It doesn't tell us, it doesn't specify what you have to do with food scraps. It just says what you must not do, what you are not allowed to do. So there are still plenty of people still have choices to find a solution that meets their own needs. So what does food scraps mean? Basically, any part of a food item that usually gets discarded, apple cores, banana peels, eggshells, things like, onion peels, things that are part of food that you separate from another part in order to eat the edible part. Those things are all considered food scraps, including meat trimmings and bones and everything. Also, anything that you scrape off your plate that didn't get finished at a meal, or anything that goes bad in your fridge or that you burned, and if it used to be or was theoretically edible, it is not allowed to go into the trash. There's one small exception to that, which is, as we'll talk about later, because home composting systems can't handle every single type of food scraps. If home composting is the solution that you choose, then you are still allowed to throw away in the trash the food items that cannot go into your home composting system. So you don't have to. You can bring them to us, as I mentioned, or look for other solutions. But it is permissible to still throw those things into the trash. And why is that important? Because this is what the alternative looks like. It just goes into a landfill, which Vermont has just one of. It's 75 miles away. So anything you put in your trash bin is going on a truck and getting driven 75 miles to get dumped in a big lined hole in the ground. And then the truck is driving 75 miles back. So we just don't want to send anything there unless we absolutely need to. There are some things for which there's no other option, but this pie chart shows the total amount of waste that folks from Chittenden County sent to the landfill in 2018. And I do need to update this with 2019 numbers, but it wasn't a huge change. At 130,000 tons, which works out to, what's the number, Ethan? Is it 3.7 pounds per day?
It was 4.3 is,
4.3. So every single person in Chittenden County, if if all of us, 4.3 pounds of waste. And what we're sending to the landfill, only about half of it, a little more than half of it actually needs to go to the landfill. The other 40, what is that, 6% is stuff that could have gone somewhere else. If you look at the blue slice is materials that could have just been recycled in a curbside bin. The orange slice is things that are recyclable through different mechanisms, like bringing them to our drop-off centers. That's things like batteries, natural wood, scrap metal, things like that. They're recyclable, but they can't go into the blue bin because we can't sort them at our facility. And then the biggest chunk there is compostable materials. So all of that stuff, 22% overall of the waste we sent didn't have to go there, could have been composted instead. And a lot of people ask, well, why does that matter? Doesn't it just break down and, we're putting it in a hole? And the truth is, it really doesn't. I'm going to skip over this one for a minute. When you put food scraps into a landfill, they don't actually break down because the landfill is designed to keep anything dangerous from getting out into the environment, to protect our groundwater, protect our air in the vicinity. So it's basically lined like a swimming pool, and then it gets covered on the top. And what happens is that food scraps aren't exposed to oxygen or any of the yummy little microbes that turn food into compost. So this picture is carrots that were dug up out of a landfill as part of a study. And they had been in the landfill for over 10 years. And we know that because right near them in the landfill was a newspaper that was 10 years old and which was still legible. So unfortunately, sending things to the landfill isn't like, when some of us of a certain age were kids and every town had a dump and it really was just a big hole in the ground, which was a very bad idea environmentally, as it turned out. Back then, the food would break down, but not anymore in our well-designed to protect the environment modern landfills. Conversely, when you put food scraps into a compost pile, they turn into beautiful compost in as little as 9 weeks. This is an experiment that our colleague Rhonda did a few years ago. She took carrots, put them into a mesh bag and mixed them into the compost pile we have going at our office. And once a week, she dug out the mesh bag, weighed the contents, took a picture, put them back in. And you can see after 2 weeks, they're already pretty mushy. After 4 weeks, you really can't almost recognize them as carrots. By 7 weeks, it's just total goo. And by 9 weeks, it's like beautiful compost. So, 9 weeks versus 10 years, and it's way more. And I'd say that after 10 years in the landfill, those carrots looked a lot more like the 2 weeks than the 4 weeks. So that's a whole lot of resources going to waste, because the other tragedy about those food scraps not being turned into compost is that food is full of nutrients. That's why we eat it. It helps us grow. So when we're burying it in the landfill, we're losing all of those nutrients. When we, put it back into the soil, it helps the next generation of food grow and keeps that cycle going. So it's just sort of a win-win-win-win situation. And I apologize, I'm going to scoot back to this slide that was out of order for some reason. So benefits of keeping food out of the landfill: one, it conserves resources, those nutrients and things that are so beneficial to the soil instead of wasting them. It reduces greenhouse gases, both by avoiding all that traveling to the landfill, but also because the composting process, the food is digested by microbes, and it does give off carbon dioxide, but in much smaller amounts. When food rots in the landfill, it actually gives off methane because it's an anaerobic environment. Methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas. Plus, we only have one landfill, and it's going to fill up. So we might as well not fill it up with stuff that doesn't need to go there. So now we'll skip back through these lovely ones and move on to our next topic. So what are we supposed to do with them? Basically, options fall into two broad categories. You can manage them on site with a variety of different methods, or you can manage them have them managed, I guess, by other people offsite. And first, we'll talk about on-site options. And there's a whole wide variety of ways to compost if composting is what you choose. And it can be as fancy and expensive as you want it to be. I assure you, you can spend a lot of money buying fancy gadgets, or it can be as cheap and easy as you want it to be. Basically, compost just happens all around us. You know, leaves fall out of trees, they, you know, land on the floor of the forest, they decompose and go back into the soil. Like, nobody's helping that process go on. So we don't need to help our food scraps decompose. They will, but by managing them in certain ways, we can prevent problems like odors, and we can make it go faster. So folks who want to garden, for example, and want that compost to improve their soil, they might be in more of a hurry and they want to manage it a little more closely to make it go as quickly as they can. People like me, I have great soil in my yard. I really don't need a ton of compost. So I use backyard composting just as a way to keep my food scraps out of the landfill. So I just chuck stuff into a big old pile, and I don't manage it in any way, shape, or form. I just throw it in there and wait. And, you know, it's going to be slower than some other ways, but it doesn't matter to me. It will just go ahead on its own. So these are pictures of a few different things you can buy. The one on the bottom left is, I think, the fanciest one there. It's a tumbler with two different chambers. So you can have one batch that's going, you know, that's cooking away while you're adding food scraps into the other chamber. And it's insulated to try to keep it going all winter long. Although, as Ethan can attest, that isn't necessarily a guarantee that it's going to work all winter, but it certainly improves your chances. And then the one just above that is a different type of tumbler. The two on the right are both, they're, instead of batch composters like the tumblers are, where you add all the ingredients at the same time and then let it cook, these are called continuous composters. So you can be adding food scraps continuously. You add them in through the top, you take off the lid and put them in there. The composting process is happening throughout, and then you pull your compost out of the bottom. So you don't have to wait until you have the ingredients for a perfect recipe. You can just throw stuff in there as you go. And then you can just make one yourself. You don't need anything at all. When I was growing up, we just had a pile, like literally a pile. We didn't have any fencing around it or anything at all. It was just out by the garden. We had the pile that we're using this year, and next to it, we had the pile we used last year. And after a year of cooking, while we were adding stuff to the other pile, we'd take the first pile, mix it into the garden, and start a fresh one. It was that simple. So you don't have to spend any money to get this going. A lot of people want to have some barrier around it for a variety of reasons, from aesthetic to critter deterrence, but it really is pretty simple. Just give the food scraps a place where nature can do its thing. You know, they need water, they need air, and they need time, and they will compost. Another on-site option that is relatively new to us, to our district, we don't have a lot of years of experience with these, is something called it's a digester as opposed to a composter. So you can see the visible part of this that's above the ground is a green cone, which is why it's called the green cone digester. What we're looking at is about 2/3 of the digester. There's another third, so about half of what's showing, is buried in the ground, and it's basically like a big plastic laundry basket or colander. It's just a big open container. It's surrounded by dirt. Microbes can get in, microbes can get out, water can get in, water goes out. And so it doesn't compost the food scraps that go in there. They get digested and all the nutrients just leach out into the soil surrounding the green cone. It leaves behind a little bit of an ashy residue, you know, just like after a fire, the last few bits of carbon that don't get consumed by the fire, you have, you know, a little pile. On the positive side, they'll take all your food scraps, including meat and bones and things that can't go into a backyard composter. On the other hand, it doesn't produce compost. So if you're interested in using it for gardening, this isn't going to be a direct help. Although I have heard from people that have put one of these in the middle of their garden, and they definitely notice that the plants closer to the green cone grow, you know, are a little bit more vigorous than the ones that are farther away. You can kind of see the circle of influence. They don't require a lot of ongoing maintenance, but it does require some elbow grease to install it. You know, to dig a hole, put it in there. And then every few years or sooner or later, depending on how the volume of material you put in there, you'll eventually need to move it, or at least dig it up and empty that ash out of the basket and put it back in place. And the biggest thing about these is that they only work if they're in full sun. So inside that green cone, there's a smaller, parallel cone that's just a little bit smaller that's black. So, and there's just the air in between the two forms insulation, and it just magnifies the sun that it's collecting. It goes inside, you know, where that black material is and just heats up, and it goes to work. But if it's not in full sun, it's not going to do the trick. And it needs to be in well-drained soil so that the liquid that gets produced as the material is digested can dissipate out into the environment. There are ways, as many of you are master gardeners, you know all about how to create, how to improve soil drainage. So you can do that by adding gravel or sand, you know, all sorts of options, but you can't, in most cases, change whether or not it's going to get full sun. And that needs to be all year round, not just, we unfortunately cited one at our office as an experiment to see how well it worked. And we put it in a spot that was getting great, bright sun all day long. And then the leaves came out and we realized that it was just a little too close to the edge of the yard. And it was in fact shaded for much of the summer. So we had to relocate it. So just comparing those two basic categories of on-site options, backyard composting doesn't quite take all food scraps, but it does produce compost. It requires some ongoing maintenance. You can get started for almost nothing, or you can spend a lot and then invest a lot of time, you know, perfecting and speeding up the decomposition. The digester takes all food, but it doesn't take anything else. No garden waste, no leaves that you rake up, no lawn clippings. All it wants is food. It doesn't produce compost, which may or may not be an issue. Doesn't require much once you get it set up, but it only works in particular conditions. So if none of those things appeal to you, you can look at offsite options. And again, fall into two basic categories. You can drop it off yourself, or you can hire somebody to come pick it up. There are an increasing, it seems like they're growing by the day, number of small startup companies that provide food scraps pickup service. Some of the major haulers also provide residential food scraps pickup, not necessarily in all areas, but it's definitely worth asking if you already have someone who comes to pick up your trash and recycling. And you can drop it off, as I mentioned earlier, at any of our drop-off centers. Our drop-off centers are set up for small loads of everything, small loads of trash, small loads of recycling, and it's basically for household waste, not, someone who's generating large amounts. So our limit per day is 30 gallons at any one drop-off center. If you go to Williston, there's no charge for the full 30 gallons. If you go to any of our other drop-off centers where we're going to have to then transport the food scraps from there to Williston, where we compost them, the fee is $1 for each 5-gallon bucket full of food scraps. That fee is waived if you're also bringing your household trash and you're paying for trash at the same time. We sort of build that expense into the trash fee. But if you're not paying for the trash, you chip in at $1 per 5-gallon bucket. Probably not so applicable here, but maybe some of you, work in restaurants or know folks with restaurants. Places with large loads, 30 gallons or more, can go directly to Green Mountain Compost, which is just about a half a mile away from our drop-off center in Williston. And there you drive over scale, you unload everything, go back over scale, and we charge by the ton with a $5 minimum fee. Just, that covers basically our costs of administering that system. And then having it picked up can look a few different ways. Basically, in most cases, they provide you with some sort of bucket. You fill it up during the week, put it out on your appointed day, and a truck of some kind, might not be this big, is eventually going to drive by and pick it up. This is a list of pickup services that were operating like 3 weeks ago, but I think at least one, possibly two others have come on in the meantime. So for most up-to-date information, I recommend going to our website, cswd.net/pickup-services, to get the most up-to-date information about what's available. So this is just a little video that shows you both how the drop-off, how it works, dropping food scraps off at our drop-off centers, and how one of our staff members who has it picked up shows us how she manages that at her house.
Good morning. How are you? Great, thanks. Food scraps only today. Okay, you're all set. Thank you very much.
Hard to tell, but that's Ethan's voice driving the
Hi,
car.
we're at the Williston Dropoff Center, where we've been directed over to this food scrap dumpster. At some other drop-off centers, you might find totes instead, the rolly carts. But here we have the full-size dumpster, and we actually have two setups here at Williston. We're just down the street from our Green Mountain Compost facility, so for as long as we are continuing to renovate and expand that facility, we don't have a drop-off there. So this is the place where you can bring household quantities of food scraps for no charge. That's up to 30 gallons, no charge here at Williston Drop-Off Center until we have the drop-off, the free drop-off for household quantities reestablished at GMC down the road. As you can see, there are many options for how you bring your food scraps to the drop-off center. You don't need one of our buckets. We do sell these, make these available, buckets just like this that are 4 gallon, but there are many other options, including some nice reuse options. Just whatever you have around. The only advantage of using a 5-gallon bucket is that if you are paying for food scrap drop-off at one of the other drop-off centers, that's how you can maximize your $1 for 5 gallons. So you'll know that you can bring a 5-gallon bucket full for the $1. The drop-off here is very simple. Open it up and dump. You gotta find the food scraps. Dump your food scraps in. And this time of year, odors and flies are a non-factor, which is nice. All right.
So it being winter, Ethan, like, do you have any suggestions on how to get like say your food scraps sit outside or in your unheated garage. Do you have any suggestions of how you can maybe get your food scraps out easier?
I do. So one thing you can do is you can line your bin with several layers of paper. So the water may absorb the first couple of layers of paper, and that may stick. But then the drier layers will then allow your food scraps to slide right out. That's a handy trick. Liners, they're also compostable liners, although those are likely to stick as well. We have been told that cooking spray is a trick that a lot of people use. So you spray the inside of your container with any kind of, commercial cooking spray, the non-stick stuff, and then your food scraps don't stick to your bucket when it's time to dump them. And that's particularly helpful if it's below freezing and they might be frozen to the sides.
And I actually use mineral oil in mine. So I wipe these. So that green one that Ethan just dumped out was wiped down with some mineral oil before I put it outside. It's been sitting outside for about a week now.
Terrific.
All right. So where can people drop off their food scraps? Here at Williston, there's no charge. Where else?
At Burlington on Pine Street, South Burlington off of Patchen Road, Milton off of Route 7, Richmond, help me, off of
Route 117.
117, thank you, and Essex off of 2A.
And Heinsberg.
And
on
Heinsberg.
Saturdays only. So
Saturdays
please,
only off of Beecher Hill Road.
Yep, so check cswd.net for hours and days of operation for all our drop-off centers. But thanks for joining us, and I hope we've demonstrated just how easy it is to drop off your food scraps.
Hi, I'm Elise Serta. I'm Marketing and Communications Manager for Chittenden Solid Waste District, and I wanted to show you how I handle food scraps at home. So basically, my method is I collect my food scraps while I'm cooking, and I actually put them out in a bin outside for my hauler to pick up. So just to show you basically what I'm doing, I have some bananas that have gone bad here. So you can kind of see that they're all speckled and kind of mushy. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to freeze them and then put them into smoothies that I eat. So you can see, I just take a piece of food, take off the peel. And this would be the same if I were making a soup and cutting up vegetables. Any vegetables that I wouldn't be using or throwing into a stock, I would actually do this too. So once I have my scraps all together, I have this, actually I think it's really cute. This is a food scrap bin that I just bought online. And as you can see, it has a carbon filter, which is kind of cool to help keep the smells down. I have it lined with a compostable bag. So you have to make sure that these are certified to be composted. And as you can see in there, I already have part of a sandwich that didn't get eaten, a moldy banana, and some coffee grounds. So this goes just right in there. And I put the cap on. I then wash my hands or I wipe them off because they're sticky. But after that, it's really simple. When this is filled, or when I think it's maybe a little smelly and I want it to go outside, I just pull my bag out, and now I'm gonna take it outside. So here we are. This is the end of the line for my food scraps. I have a bigger bucket outside. I just throw it in. And by the time my hauler ends up picking up once a week, this thing will be filled. And as you can see, I just tighten down my container and it stays outside. And animals haven't gotten into it. It's pretty secure. It even sometimes a pain to get off. But as you can see, it says compost, compostables, food scraps. I sit it on top of my bin, bring it out to the curb, and my hauler comes and picks it up. And then the scraps are actually brought to Green Mountain Compost ultimately, and then it gets made into cool compost for Vermonters. So thanks for letting me show you what I do.
All right, so one small amendment to Elise's method, which is lovely, but the thing about compostable bags is they're designed to break down. They are not, like a hefty bag that can just hold as much as you want to shove into it. So depending on what's in there, you may or may not be able to actually pick the bag up out of the container and have it continue to hold all of the food scraps that are in there, especially if you have some heavy things like watermelon rind or bones or ribs, whatever. So I would recommend actually carrying the whole bucket outside and tipping it upside down to allow the bag and the food scraps to come out, rather than ending up with a pile of, getting ready to be composted food scraps in the middle of your living room or garage. So no matter what option you choose, on-site, off-site, pick up, drop off, the universal process is that everybody needs to collect their food scraps in their kitchen, no matter what they're eventually going to do with them. If they're going to feed them to chickens or take them to, a neighbor's farm, no matter what you're doing with them, you need to collect them in the kitchen. So just a few tips, because sometimes, people find that icky. And I always like to remind people that, this is stuff that you're throwing away anyway. This isn't anything new. If you were putting it in your trash, it was just sitting right there in your kitchen. So this is just sitting in a different container. And one of the beauties of that is that now your trash doesn't smell. So like I go weeks without taking my trash out. It takes forever for me to fill up my kitchen trash can, and nothing ever gets smelly in there because no food's going out. So a lot of people are worried, well, how am I going to manage the smell? How am I going to manage, fruit flies? Exactly the same way you manage it in your trash. Get smelly, take it out. It's really that simple. And during certain times of the year, you're going to have to take it out more frequently than others. The warmer it is, the faster stuff is going to start breaking down. But it's instead of thinking of it as a new icky thing, just think of it as, try to reframe it as just putting them into a different container, just like you were before. It's just a different bucket. So, pick a countertop container that meets your needs. Again, as Ethan mentioned, I think in the video, you don't need anything special. You can use a mixing bowl, a soup pot. My mom always she just kept a colander in the sink. So we would put food scraps in there, and anything icky could just drip out, go right down the kitchen drain. And then when it was time to take it outside, we just put a pie plate underneath it and walk it out to the compost pile and dump it. If you are using a bucket of some sort, whether it's an official bucket or one that you buy online like Elise has, and there are lots of different options like that. I do recommend lining it with either newspaper or paper towels or something, or if anybody has any paper grocery bags left over from before we all got trained to bring our own bags to the store, those are great liners because it's pretty sturdy paper, and it doesn't get ooky right away, and that'll absorb some of the liquid that's in there and just make it a little less likely that food is going to stick to the sides of your container. If you have stuff that's going to get particularly stinky, like, certain kinds of cheese or meat or anything that is just going to be unpleasant if it starts decomposing in your kitchen, throw them in your freezer. If you use a bucket that's like the size Elise has, you can keep your whole container in the fridge or freezer. Or you can just put it in, little Ziploc bags or whatever kind of bag or Tupperware container you happen to have. A yogurt, like a quart-sized yogurt tub, is a great option. Just keep in the fridge until you're ready to empty your countertop container. Then put it all into the countertop container and take it on outside. I rinse mine out with water and usually some distilled vinegar. My containers on the large size, it's like the one Ethan was dumping out of, so it doesn't fit in a dishwasher. I hose it outside, or in the winter, I rinse it out in my shower. I dump the ooky water down the toilet, not into my bathtub, but that works well. So just clean it up as best you can and start over. yeah, just a few other points is the, the best way to avoid having to do all this is to stop wasting food. I find that when you start separating your food scraps, you become a lot more aware of what's in there. And you're thinking, I paid $2.99 for that at the grocery store, and now I'm just moving it into this container where it's not going to waste because it'll get turned into compost, but that's money I didn't need to spend. So looking for ways to reduce the food scraps you're generating is the best option. Plan your meals carefully so that you can use the leftovers from one meal in the next. Save vegetable peelings and things to use in making soup stocks, things like that. But no matter what you do, unless you're like my neighbor, and when I was a kid used to eat his apple cores, no matter how careful you are, you're going to have some stuff that you aren't able to eat. So that's when these other systems come into play. And you don't have to choose just one of these methods. For some people, a combination works well. Some people do backyard composting during, the spring, summer, and fall, but in the winter, they just kind of put the lid on and let it cook on its own and bring food scraps to us in the meantime. Some people will use both a composting pile or container of some sort and a digester so that their veggie things can go into the composter along with all of their leaves and grass trimmings and things. And then they put just the meat and bones and things into their green cone digester, and that slows down, how quickly the digester is going to get filled up. Coffee grounds are a great tip for keeping smells down, both in your kitchen container and in the larger container if you use one, like I do. I have a little container, on my counter, and then I dump it into my bigger container that I keep just right outside my back door. Coffee grounds are a great way to, you just sprinkle those along the top, and they'll keep odors down. And my understanding, although I have not verified this scientifically, is that it also has a tendency to reduce fruit flies. I don't know if it creates a surface that the flies don't like to land on to lay their eggs or something, or the smell is too intense. And that's pretty much it. As you're composting, if you decide to compost at home, you'll find that some foods compost a lot more quickly than others. So if that's problematic to you, if you don't like picking, when you're pulling compost out, seeing a corn cob and just chucking it back in to keep cooking, you can either chop those things up. The smaller they are, the more surface area there is, the more quickly they'll break down. Or you can keep those out and send those to Green Mountain Compost and just keep the nice, fresh, leafy stuff that breaks down really quickly at your house.
And I'll use that as an opportunity, Robin, to jump in and answer a quick question about kitchen grease. Someone asked about how to handle kitchen grease, and kitchen grease is challenging.
Yep.
I will admit. So collecting it in a can sounds reasonable, as this person is suggesting they do. And you probably don't want to try to, I wouldn't worry about a small amount of grease in my backyard compost, but anything that I was collecting in can type quantities, I would bring to, you could put in your trash if you're composting in the backyard, because there's the exemption, or you can put it in your commercial compost to go to GMC.
And it could be a helpful way to coat your bucket. If you want to put some kind of coating in there to make it easier to get frozen food scraps out, you could keep that can next to the container you're going to bring to the drop-off center and use it little by little.
Good point. We promote reuse. So grease has other uses, including food. Other questions you ready for, Robin?
Oh, yes. Just one other thing on the grease. Our colleague Rhonda makes suet out of it. For a lot of folks who like to feed birds, she actually saves it up. And we do another webinar that focuses just exclusively on strategies for reducing food waste, both, innovative ways to help things last longer and innovative ways to use things up. And she demonstrated her suet making last time we did the webinar, which was pretty fun to watch.
Someone is asking about a large container kept outside in the winter freezing and how you get
Yep.
the food scraps out. And I'll mention that that's what we were talking about in the video. And so several layers of paper, the paper that gets saturated may freeze solid to the container, but then the inner or the outer layers are still stay dry, or coating your bucket with something like grease or cooking spray.
And, thumping it on the side, on the sides a few times to sort of loosen it up a little bit can help. If you're bringing it, transporting it from your house to a drop-off center, hopefully it'll start to thaw a little bit as it's in your car on the way. But that is definitely a challenge. So if you find any other innovative ways to make that easier, we would love to hear about them, because we get that question a lot. And we've given you all the suggestions we're currently aware of, but would love to hear more.
Digester, talking about a green cone, I assume, does it attract bears?
It's not supposed to. I cannot explain quite why. I don't recall I haven't looked at that part of their website in a while. But I would encourage you to just Google it if you have internet access. It's green cone digester. One of the first entries that it pulls up will be, there's only one company that makes them. It's Canadian. And their website has a ton of information. But I have not heard of any instances of bears being attracted. I know with compost, if it's managed properly with, layering, dry carbon-rich materials over your fresh nitrogen-rich veggies and things, that will reduce odors and make the compost pile less attractive or not at all attractive to critters. But since you aren't putting non-food into the digester, I'm not sure why there aren't odors that would attract. So I would look it up on their website, unless Ethan happens to know.
Well, I'll just elaborate and say that, like we say about composting, and we tend to say this a lot, but the green cone doesn't emit a lot of odors if you were from when it's closed. It does a great job of containing the odors in, so you can be standing right over it and not be getting much of a whiff. And that means that we come back to, don't bring bears to your property in the first place and you're likely to be okay. So it's things like leaving your bird feeder out that become then the reason why the bear visits, and then, oh, well, they're there. Now I can smell your green cone or your compost, and it's of interest to me. But it's often not the reason why they're showing up, because those things are not particularly fragrant. Other questions? What can you tell us about how the different independents operate? Will some come right up to your doorstep?
I don't know. I have a few friends who have used commercial pickup, and in all of their cases, they took it out to the curb. And they also all lived in, places like Winooski and Burlington, where it wasn't very far to the curb. They didn't have a half-mile long driveway. So I do not honestly know if there are places that do like doorstep service. But it's certainly worth asking. Most of these companies are, they're new, they're eager, they want customers, they want to make people happy. And, if it's something they can do, my guess is that they will. Might cost a little bit more to get the white glove treatment, but it might not. Can't hurt to ask.
Yeah, and I think they tend to be smaller companies that are relatively new, and so they are much more flexible. It's different than working with like a big trash hauler, some of which are regional here. These are folks where you're probably the person you call and talk to, maybe the person who's coming around to pick up your food scraps, and so it's probably negotiable.
Yeah.
Other questions? Will you be selling the green cone digesters? We do. So that is easily done. You can contact, it's our colleague Rhonda, and we can put you in touch with her if you email us and follow up, or to call our hotline to arrange that. We are doing pickups by appointment with payment in advance.
Yeah, I
And they
should have
cost
mentioned that.
$130.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that when we were back on the on-site options. So we do sell the green cone digesters, and we also sell what's called the soil saver, which was one of the really simple models that we saw in the picture. It's just a 4-sided with a lid. There's no bottom to it, so you just sit it on the ground. You can put it on a piece of plywood or even on a driveway, I would guess. Although it's certainly not going to get as much interaction with the invertebrates and microorganisms and things that are already in the soil. But you just set it down, open the lid, put your stuff in, add water if it hasn't been raining in a while, stir it up if you want. And those are $60. The green cone is $130.
One of our participants has noted that they use, let me pull it up, but use a plastic bag as a liner, and then the compostable bag goes inside the plastic bag. So they
That's
have
a
to
great
periodically
idea.
replace the plastic, but no problem getting the compostable out. So it's a good one.
That's a great
We
idea.
might steal that one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Um,
have recommended that to people like at events, that have big containers, just where the likelihood of the bag breaking is so much greater, but it never occurred to me as a keep it from freezing strategy. And that's brilliant.
Thank you, Nancy. Comment that it seems like this will be hard for some. What kind of pushback has there been? You want to take that one?
Yeah, I've been surprised. I thought we would get a lot, and I haven't gotten nearly as much as I expected. Now there could be a number of reasons for that. It could be that those who are less inclined to want to do this kind of thing on their own are just ignoring the law and not doing it. So they're not calling us to complain about it. But I mean, I haven't run into folks or heard from folks who have said, this is just ridiculous, I'm not going to do it. Heard from a lot of people who have said, I've never done it before, but I see it's a good idea. So tell me how. And there are always a lot of people who are really psyched about it, have been doing it for years and want to learn about new options. And we do offer a backyard composting workshop that gets much more into the details of how to manage these different systems and how to maximize the decomposition rate and stuff like that. Have you heard a lot of pushback, Ethan?
No, I think, there is, for some people, there's a bit of a reluctance because it just seems like the fruit flies or the smells. But I think like all of us who have been composting for a while, you learn that that's just part of the deal, and that really it's only that it's maybe more obvious because it's not in your trash, not that you're not already getting those things in the stuff in your trash. And so I think once people have been doing it for a little while, they are on board. I'm trying to think whether I have other, I think, and I think that's largely true of the business community too. I work with businesses, and I found that some business owners are very eager to have everybody doing this in as much as possible. Some are a little bit more reluctant and leery of things like it attracting vermin and so forth. But often that's overstated, and people, once they're doing it, realize that it's not so different than having that stuff in your dumpster, your trash dumpster. Let's see. A question about from a Burlingtonian about the drop-off center there and expanding days and hours. I understand other materials won't be collected there. So thank you for understanding that, and I'll let you respond to the rest, Robin.
Yeah, I don't know, but that's certainly request slash suggestion that I'll pass along. I know some of our hours are being tweaked in April, but I can't remember. And now I'm throwing it back to Ethan. Do you happen to remember if the Burlington schedule is going to be?
I don't remember hearing the
Expanding?
Burlington schedule is going to be expanded, but we do know that there is intention to, once we feel like there's not a chance of having to sort of revert back due to the pandemic and staffing issues, there's a plan to try to have more days and more hours in general.
Yeah, all of our sites have been operating fewer hours than they used to make sure that we have adequate resources. And in the event one customer comes through and then later that day or week, they test positive for COVID. Now everybody who was working at that location that day is in quarantine for 2 weeks. So we have to have other people that we can pull in. So we tried not to spread our staff resources out quite as thinly as we used to, but hopefully that'll be changing in the not too distant future.
And somebody has recently noticed mice and moles in their backyard bin. Anything to be doing differently? They also mentioned they put paper towels and paper bags in, and are questioning whether that's a reasonable practice.
Yeah, it definitely is. And that can serve as a great carbon source. As I've alluded to a couple of times, when you're putting fresh stuff out in your compost pile, you want to, cover it up as much as you can with things like dried leaves or cardboard or newspaper, paper towels. Those are paper bags. Those are great options just to provide. You want to balance how much carbon and nitrogen there is in it to try to encourage decomposition to happen quickly and prevent it from shifting over into like more rotting, which is where you get the odors when things go anaerobic and start to get smelly. And on the moles and voles, that is not something I had heard from folks before. So I'm afraid I don't have any tremendous advice to give. I'll certainly ask colleagues, and we'll be sending a follow-up email in a couple of days that will have a recording of this webinar and links to a whole bunch of other resources, including all the different parts of our webpage that we've mentioned. And if I'm able to get answers to that and the digester bears question, I'll throw that in there as well.
Yeah, and I would say not the end of the world for, I think the main thing would be worrying if it means that you're getting more around your property and you're worried you're getting into your house and things like that. The fact they're getting into compost by itself is not a problem if it doesn't lead to other issues. But it is one of the reasons, those smaller critters, why some people prefer the more secure containers like a tumbler or a soil saver versus a pallet-based system where they're going to get through the slats.
Yeah.
That is a sort of personal preference thing.
And Ethan, I just recognized a huge oversight that I made as we were sort of anxious to get going here. And I failed to thank Jonathan Treffery for putting this together through the, is it Northwestern? I think it's Northwestern Vermont Master Gardeners Association. They were sort of not everyone on the webinar is part of that group, but a lot of folks are. And so I want to thank him for inviting us to provide this webinar and for promoting it among his group. And I apologize, Jonathan, for not having given you that credit earlier on. Thank you. And we are nearing the end of our time. It's 7:29 by my clock. I am happy to stay and answer questions for, another 10, 15, 20 minutes if people still have them, but I do want to give folks permission, not that you need it, but the official presentation is over, so feel free to check out anytime you need to. And but I can't speak for Ethan, but I can certainly stay for a little while. I see that there are some more questions coming in, so we'll stay here and try to address those.
There has been a couple of questions about enforcement of the law, and I'll address that. Nobody's going to be going through your, individual or your household's trash to see whether you're following the law. You can think of recycling. No one's doing that to make sure that every can is getting recycled from your household. But larger generators, so big multi-unit buildings or businesses like grocery stores and restaurants are going to get some scrutiny. We're going to visit them and have that conversation about whether that's happening. And we are going to keep an eye on what's going through the transfer station to the landfill. And so if we see large quantities coming from somewhere, we're going to flag that and follow up. And people who flaunt the law could be subject to fines. We certainly will not make that the first line. We'll make sure they understand what they need to be doing and give them an opportunity to be doing it right. But we do have enforcement authority of it's a state law, but we as the local authority can enforce it. So that's that piece. Somebody points out that it would be really cool if CSAs, if farmers were interested in taking back the food scraps when they drop off the CSA produce.
That's a great idea.
It's cool. It's very cool. So
makes it go full circle. That's a great idea. And I've also thought some of the community gardens might be able or willing to host like a drop-off site where folks could bring. So yeah, that's certainly something we can reach out and suggest, look into. If you are a member of a CSA, let those folks know, because hearing from customers that customers want something certainly has a lot more impact than hearing from us that, hey, theoretically, this might work. When they hear it from real live participants, I think it carries a little more weight.
We have not seen anyone doing it, to answer your question there, Victoria. Thank you for the thought. It's a good one, but we have not seen it. Interesting idea. Jonathan just points out that moles and voles are macro decomposers, perhaps, and can move the process along faster. And good point that it's true that that animal feeding on it is part of what's breaking it down. And some of those animals are bigger than others.
Yeah, and the bigger the animal, the faster it works. Little microbes, they might eat 100 times their body weight, but it's still a tiny little amount. Moles and voles eat more, so they're going to digest it and excrete it more quickly. So it's a plus and a minus.
Lucy notes that moving piles into more open field areas rather than your houses prevents maybe a rodent measure, and that's true. That certainly, if you're concerned that your compost is becoming a mecca for small rodents, and that's that you don't want near your house, moving it further from the house is a good idea.
Yeah,
for sure.
And not necessarily right on your property line next to your neighbor's backyard either. You want to be cognizant of the whole surrounding and try to have the least amount of impact on your house and others.
And on that note, I will say that I think for people living in Chittenden County, in most cases, you're going to want to have your pile secured to some degree, because just a neighbor's dog getting into it, there actually are neurotoxins that can be quite more than just upsetting to the stomach of dogs, but deadly.
Yeah, they can be quite dangerous.
So just for all those reasons, attracting critters, neighbors' dogs, and so forth, it's a good idea to have at least some structure around your compost pile in a place like anywhere in Chittenden County, probably. And then last question that we have up on the board at this point, Robin, is what do schools do with compostable flatware, cups, forks, etc.? There was a notice that said they won't be able to compost them in the future. Yeah.
So unfortunately, the compost facility that we run has made the difficult decision. It was not without a lot of soul searching and vigorous discussion about what the best way to proceed was, but we made the decision to stop accepting compostable foodware for a whole variety of reasons. The primary one, I think, although priorities differ from person to person, is to reduce the contamination we're currently seeing in the materials that come in. The problem is,
just be very clear, this is a change going into effect in January.
Yeah, so next year.
You may start to hear about it, but it does not affect what you can put in the compost right now or even for the next 8 months.
Right. Thank you, Ethan. Very good point. So one of the problems is that even though the school has done great research and is sure that the forks and knives that they're purchasing are compostable, that they are certified compostable, the problem is they don't look really a whole lot different than a plastic knife or fork. And what happens, unfortunately, is people play copycat, and people are, they're approaching a sorting station. They're a little unsure where what they're holding is supposed to go. And then they see forks in the compost, like, oh, excellent, forks go here. And then you start to see a lot of look-alike materials that unfortunately are not compostable. They're plastic. And that happens not just with utensils, but with paper plates, many of which are coated with plastic, as opposed to the uncoated ones that we currently accept, and paper cups, things like that. And there are compostable cups that look just like clear plastic, and they unfortunately attract other clear plastic cups. And it's just really, really unfortunate that we've been lucky so far that we've had a facility that takes those things. We were the only one in the state that accepted compostable foodware. So, we held out as long as we could, but unfortunately the benefits of keeping all of those things out of the landfill have become outweighed by the downside of the contamination that they bring with them. So I guess the short answer to your question is, up until next January, through December 31st, schools can continue putting those compostable foodware items into their food scraps containers, but they will no longer belong there starting next January 1st. And one of the reasons for that long implementation timeline was because we know schools buy stuff in bulk way ahead of time. Their budgets are set, way before the school year starts. And so by the time this decision was announced, most schools had probably already, invested in materials that they're going to use next year. So we wanted to make sure folks who have been relying on compostable foodware had enough time to use up their current stock, and then switch to different products afterwards.
No other questions on the board, and we are now
Excellent.
8 minutes
8
over.
minutes
So,
Oop.
Thank you, Cynthia, and Victoria. Appreciate everyone tuning in.
Yes, thank you very much.
And as we
go ahead.
did get a question about recording, and that will be available. So this is being recorded, and we will post it online and send you the link.
Yep, along with all those other resources we talked about. So thanks again for coming. We'll sign off, and good luck with your food scraps. And give us a call if you have any other questions. Our hotline 872-8111. We love to help people with their specific issues and help find solutions.
Thanks again to Jonathan for setting it up.
Yep. Thank you, Jonathan. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.